Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am your host for today, at least, Dan Harris. With me are Mike Tagliere and the newest member of the team, Joe Pisapia. You can find us on Twitter at Mike Tagliere NFL, at Joe Pisapia17, and at Dan Harris80. Joe, welcome aboard. This is your first official podcast as a member of the team. How do you feel?
I feel great. It feels really good to be here with you guys, and it's like an old shoe, and I'm sure you've gotten that before, Dan Harris. A lot of people, I'm sure, in the past have compared you to an old shoe for different reasons, but this is great. This feels like home. It always has, and I just want to say thank you right off the bat to everybody on the Fantasy Pros squad and the team, because they have done just such a tremendous job of just making me feel so welcome, setting me up with all the things that I need to get set up with, and it is great to be here with you and getting paid for it. I mean, God, does it get better than that? This is great.
I'm still trying to process the old shoe comment. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Or something. Yeah. I'll take it. I have been called far worse things on and off the air. But Tags, Joe, you're gonna have to bring it today because Tags, you sound like you may not make it through this entire podcast. Are you okay over there?
No, I mean, I sat here and I thought about it while you guys were talking pre-show, and I sat there and I was like, I think I figured it out. These two make me physically sick.
Yes.
That's basically where I'm at.
So
with
it begins.
I thought it might have been the 8 feet of snow and the broken snowblower that was doing it to you, which we'll talk about again on our podcast, Tags. Old men talking about snow. Which
yeah,
is
no, I mean, I'm sure that has something to do with it, but you two don't help.
God. All right. Well, hopefully you can persevere because we do have a fun show today. We're going to be talking about some interesting facts from the 2020 season and how they might factor into our 2021 analysis. Thankfully, Tags wrote a remarkable article about it that we will talk about as we get into it, and we will finish up with some listener questions. But before we get into it, let me remind you guys about our new Dynasty Football podcast. It is hosted by Ray Garvin and Kyle Yates. Now, everyone knows that on this podcast, I make fun of Tags. Like, that's just kind of our shtick. That's how our friendship almost works. So I will allow you to know, and you guys can, Tags, you can back me up on this, because this is true, that one of the many reasons I tell you how much I respect you as an analyst and everything like that is because you're so detailed and you're so researched, but you can present things in a way that not only appeals to like the hardcore fantasy football player, but also in a way that makes sense to the casual fantasy football player. Tags, I do say that to you, right? I've said that to you. That is like,
I kid you not, Dan. I tell people that's one of the best compliments I've ever received, so I appreciate it.
That's why you're the best in the biz as far as I'm concerned. But if you listen to the first episode of the Dynasty Football Podcast, or the second one that came out yesterday night, you will get that exact same feel from Ray and Yates. They're able to break down Dynasty in a way that if you're a hardcore player, you'll love it. If you're a newbie, you'll love it. If you've never played before, you'll love it. A ton of great information there. They are charismatic. It's a great listen. Just go ahead, search for it anywhere that you listen to podcasts, or go to fantasypros.com/podcast. Again, that is the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Football Podcast. All right, let's get into it. Tags, let's start with your article. All right, it's 175 interesting facts from the 2020 fantasy football season. So I guess tell about the process of how you wrote that, how long it took you, because it took me 20 minutes just to read the entire thing. So walk through it. Tell me how it started and how you wound up finding all these incredibly interesting things from last year.
Well, yeah, I mean, before I started writing about fantasy and having the job as a full-time job, this is the stuff that I did when I had a full-time job. And this is how I knew that football was for me, because when you have a day off work, it's like, what do you do in that free time? Me, it was always looking up interesting little stats and articles that had stats that were totally obscure. Those were the things that interested me. So basically, now that I have time to do that, now that the primer is done, it's like I can compile all these spreadsheets that I have throughout the season. I've been keeping basically stats that go back to 2009 is when I started compiling all these stats. And so I go through legit over the last 10, 15 years sometimes. Sometimes I'll pull up other resources to see how it ranked all time. Literally, I want to find stats for this article. I don't want to tell you who led the league in rushing yard. I don't want to do that. I want to every stat that you read in this article, I wanted people to be like, really? I love it when people double check it, because they feel like that there's no way it's real. So basically trying to find as many stats as I can that make you say, oh, wow. And that's why when you told me we were going to do a podcast on this article, it was hard, because it's almost like every one of these stats is like a little kid to me. It's like, how do you pick your favorite kid? You don't. But again, I narrowed it down as much as I could, but 175 stats to read is pretty. It's pretty in depth. And again, Dan, I know that we're going to get to it in a little bit, but there was, Dan, you want to tell them what you did preparing for this podcast?
Yeah. So I as everyone knows who's listened to this podcast for this season, all I do is I ride Tags' coattails. Like, that's my philosophy generally. Like, Tags does all the work and I just kind of piggyback onto him. So with this, I was like, it's 175 interesting facts. It's a great read. Let me see what I could do to come up with a couple on my own, right? Let me find some stuff that I found interesting that wasn't necessarily in Tag's article. So without even looking at it first, I said, let me look at it. And I found something that I was really excited about. I was like, great. And then I went to Tag's article later as I was reading to put some in, and he had that in there because he's just Tags. It's nuts. This is obnoxious, but whatever. I love you. So I do have one or two maybe that probably aren't as interesting as you'll find in the article, but that are not actually in the article. Others, I just pretty much looked at the article and said, wow, that's what's great. Now, Joe, you are going to be taking over for me as the primary host of this podcast. So for now, though, you are in the analyst-only chair, so you have to deal with that. So I get to start with you. You read that article. You told me that it was like the War and Peace of fantasy football articles, like one of the great works of all time. So why don't you go ahead, start us off, take a fact, I presume, hopefully from Tag's article, and you didn't waste time like I did, that you found really interesting, and then let's talk about it for what it might mean for next year.
Well, of course I didn't waste time because I know no one's going to outwork Tags, so I'm just going to go there. I'm going to find interesting things and then kind of roll them into bigger form conversations. And guess what? When this article came out a week ago, I already started stealing stuff for it to talk about on TV. I didn't pass it off as my own, but I did steal it. And I did give Mike some credit there with this, and I didn't realize 175, he feels like it's his children. That's amazing. It's like just a notch behind Phillip Rivers. And if you're thinking out there, anybody out there who might have, wow, I don't want to read all these things. Look, what you could do is you could just filter out a lot of them by just crossing out Davante Adams, because about 72 of these are about Davante Adams because Mike loves him so much. I think he's got the Davante Adams underoos. He's got it's amazing what he's got, but these are amazing facts. And I wanted to start with number 2 and 158 and kind of tie them together. Because Mike's got one here at number 2 about Derrick Henry, who scored 304 fantasy points on the ground alone in 2020, which was the most by a running back over the last 10 years. In fact, it was 23 points more than the number 2 on that list, and 42 more than number 3. And then I want to jump to 158 and combine these two, and the reason is this. There have been 20 running backs who've totaled 350 plus touches over the last, 10 years I think you've got here? Mm-hmm, yep. Mike likes the 10-year thing, right? So every single one of them finished as a top 5 running back in PPR formats. So I'm tying this together because I think we need to finally just accept this notion that yards are yards. Guys who are the number 1 focal point of their respective offenses can still be really good top 5 overall PPR picks. And I think that there was this narrative that builds out there that, well, he doesn't catch the ball a ton and that always hurts Derrick Henry. Well, no, because 2 years in a row now he's led the league, which I did predict 2 years in a row. I just want to say on this podcast that he would lead the league in rushing. And when you're doing that at the same amount of clip and the amount of carries this guy's getting, you have to understand that is okay to still pay a premium for him. It's okay to use a top 3 pick if you just want to be safe, even in PPR with a guy like Derrick Henry, because he's so unique, not just in body type, because of what he brings in terms of to the offense, and of course, how the offense filters through him. And I just think that we can finally let go of this notion. Now, he did have a lot of carries. I get it. He hit that 370 threshold. That is a lot. But I think, considering the workload the first year or so of Derrick Henry, that we're still good for at least one more year here where he's going to be a beast. So I wanted to kind of take those 2 facts and kind of string them all together for you, Tags.
Yeah, I love it. So I think there are a couple things. One, I did a PPR draft for the FSGA right before the season started. I think I was pick 10. It's PPR league, and Derrick Henry fell there, and I just thought that was ridiculous. Like, I understand just what you're saying, Joe. Like, of course, you want your running back to factor into the passing game if they can, but, I mean, with a guy like Henry, it doesn't really matter. Now, I'll ask you, Tag, since, you came up with these stats. Henry is 27, right? And he'll be, rapidly approaching his 28th birthday by the time next season starts. As Joe mentioned, there were a lot of touches last year, 378 carries, 19 receptions. Are you at all concerned about this workload and what it may mean for him next year?
Yes and no. I mean, as Joe said, one of the stats in there is that every running back who's totaled 350 plus touches over the last 10 years has finished as a top 5 running back. So barring injury to Derrick Henry, I don't think anybody will ever question whether or not he hits that 350 touch mark. Is he involved in the passing game? Not as much as he probably should be. But he's probably going to hit 350 carries, or at least close to it. You know what I mean? So I feel like he's a safe pick. And if we go back to the beginning of 2020, when, that the top of that draft, right? You got past CMC, Saquon, Zeke, and it was like, you had Alvin Kamara, you had Dalvin Cook, and you had Derrick Henry. And even in PPR formats, which is what I predominantly play in, I started taking Derrick Henry at number 4 overall because I had question marks about Kamara, whether or not he was going to hold out. He had an injury in the preseason that it seemed like they were masking a little bit. And then Dalvin Cook, it was like he was dealing with the contract situation, so I was waiting for that to get played out. And I just feel like Derrick Henry, okay, I'm not getting the number 1 running back, but I am getting a safe running back, a guy that's going to get all those touches, that's going to score points, and he's going to have those massive games too. That there's a stat I'm going to bring up later about Derrick Henry that it just highlights just how damn good he's been. So, I mean, yes, Derrick Henry is a top 6 pick, 100%. He may not finish as the RB1, but basically it comes to the idea that you cannot win your fantasy draft in the first or second round, but you can help yourself lose it. That's a fact.
Yeah. And to piggyback that real quick, Dan, I just want to say, and going into next season too, when we're talking about this first round, there are questions about so many of these guys. There's questions about McCaffrey, questions about Saquon, questions about Alvin Kamara, because what's the Saints quarterback situation going to be? Questions about Ezekiel Elliott, what he looked like in the second half of this year after Dak Prescott got hurt, and how things really just did not go well for him, and it's not the same offensive line it was 3 or 4 years ago. So there's so many things out there in terms of question marks in the first round. But Derrick Henry's that one shining beacon still where, like Mike said, he's probably going to be around 350 again. Yes, there's some concerns about the workload, but the workload is also tied into the insurance policy of him being a good investment. And if you don't want to take a huge risk there in that first round, there's nothing wrong with using a top 3 pick on him.
And I assume, of course, given how productive both he and the Titans offense generally has been, that we're not at all concerned about the fact that Arthur Smith is leaving, right? And Todd Downing is there. I mean, they were one, 51-49 split in terms of running. We can assume that probably the offensive philosophy is going to remain the same going forward, right, Tags?
You would think that it's going to. It does raise a few question marks, but maybe they involve him a little bit more in the passing game and helps offset that. Because there's there's no other running back in this roster that's going to take carries from Derrick Henry when he's available and ready to be on the field.
Right. All right. That's fair. Let's go to you then, Tags. What about you? The million facts. By the way, I will say, because I joked about how long it was and everything like that, like every fact is a sentence. So, I mean, you just bomb right through it. It's the incredible nuggets that are in there. Tags, go ahead. What's one you want to talk about?
I'll just do the Derrick Henry one now since we're already talking about him. Derrick Henry had 3 games with 200 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns in 2020. There are just 3 other running backs in NFL history who have accomplished that over their entire career, not just 1 year. Henry has 5 games in his career, which is obviously an NFL record, but the other 3 running backs were Jim Brown, Barry Sanders, and LaDainian Tomlinson. That's elite territory. And these guys did it 3 times in their career. He did it 3 times in 2020 alone. So, again, you're getting the safety of Derrick Henry where maybe he may not catch passes, but he does give you that massive upside because he has that breakaway speed, which is really rare. Usually when you get a running back that catches 15, 20 passes a season, it's because he's a 1-2 down back. He's a bigger running back. He might be a little bit of a plotter. But Derrick Henry's not that guy. It's like once he breaks that initial line of defense, he's gone. You know what I mean?
So, Tags, without holding you to it, we've talked a little bit about rankings, and we rank primarily for half PPR format. That's what the rankings competition does. That's usually when we submit our rankings. Where would you take Derrick Henry right now in your overall rankings if you were drafting today?
If I were drafting today, I have him at number 5 overall. I would actually, if someone wanted to take him at number 4 over Alvin Kamara, I would not fault them for it because with Drew Brees leaving, that team changing a little bit, there's going to be some question marks about Kamara and his workload because he's never hit 200 carries in a season. He's relied on big touchdowns. He's relied on a lot of dump-off passes, and we saw when Taysom Hill kind of took over, there was one game in there where he caught passes, but...
All right. You're stealing my stat. You're stealing my stat. And I was like, all right, I've got a Tennessee Titans stat. All right, maybe I'll lead with that, the one that we were joking about. But now I think I've got to go into the Alvin Kamara stat. Now, it's not that exciting, but I do think that leads us into something that I think we need to talk about. And it's not quite as like the in-depth research, but it is something that, for the reasons that you're saying, Tags, we need to think about. So I was thinking about Alvin Kamara, and I was like, let me look. Joe, you joked about Devontae Adams. Alvin Kamara, all over the place in the 175 interesting facts. There are a lot of interesting things. So there are a couple of things. Number 55, Kamara finished as the number one running back in half PPR formats despite receiving just 187 carries. Over the previous 10 years, no running back had finished number one or number two with fewer than 256 carries. Fact number 103, Alvin Kamara led all running backs with 756 receiving yards, the lowest for a league leader since 2015. And fact number 117, Alvin Kamara scored 147.1 PPR points through the air alone, which led the league. That was a far cry from Austin Eckler's 193.3 PPR points through the air in 2019. So those are all great. But Tax, let's talk about that. What we said with Taysom Hill. We don't know necessarily that Taysom Hill is going to be the Saints starter next year, but let's assume that he is, because Kamara with Drew Brees received 8.3 targets per game. With Taysom Hill, 4 targets per game. And even that is probably inflated because you mentioned it, Tags. Four games, he received 6 targets in the first 3 games. It was just that last game that they were behind against Philadelphia that he got 10 targets, but I think that's the outlier. So whether or not we expect that to continue. So with Drew Brees, 29.2, I'll use PPR to make the point a little firmer, 29.2 fantasy points per game. With Taysom Hill, 14.6 fantasy points per game. So yeah, I'll go to Joe. Are you worried at all about like Kamara coming into next year, which sounds ludicrous after the season, but given the fact that there is a huge difference if it is Taysom Hill and Drew Brees, would you bump him down your draft board a little bit?
Look, I think you'd be crazy to be not concerned about it. I think at the same time, you look at the sample size and also realize over that period of time, one of those games was that game where Kendall Hinton was playing quarterback, right, for the Denver Broncos, and they faced them. So, what did you need offensively out of anybody? So I think that skews a little bit of the numbers, just a tad. Yep. Off the top of my head. But I think that you should be concerned because it could be a little bit different if Taysom Hill is the quarterback. And I don't think it would be, oh my God, we have to drop him out of the first round kind of conversation either. But I think there's reasons where you then compare everything we were talking about with Derrick Henry and you say, well, why am I taking the risk with my first pick? There's no upside there, right? Because the only upside is, do you think it's going to be better with Taysom Hill? And it's hard to make that argument. You're trying to make the argument it can be the same as it's been in the past with Drew Brees. Okay, you can find some things to kind of make that argument, and you could certainly find the other, which is it could be worse. So if the best case scenario is the same, that's great, but I think that you can't make an argument for it to get better. You can't make an argument for improvement, and I think that certainly puts doubt. And I think whenever there's doubt in the first round conversation, especially a top 5 player, then it's worth really discussing that and saying, why am I taking that kind of risk? And yes, anyone can get hurt. We all know that. That's just part of the game. But at the same time, I think it's something to really strongly consider. I don't think it's going to be Taysom Hill when all said and done. I just really don't feel that's the direction they're going to go at the quarterback position. We'll see how it plays out. Especially with so many quarterbacks available this year. And I know they have cap issues, and I understand New Orleans is in a difficult spot there. But for me, I think really you have to wait and see what the quarterback they're going to go with in 2021 before you start really evaluating Kamara on the board. It's just not fair. It's too speculative for me.
All right, very quick, Tags. If it is Taysom Hill, are you really taking a lot from what we saw in those 4 games, or do we think with a full offseason to sort of get him involved in the offense of what it would look like with him as the full-time starter, that things would be a bit better for Kamara in terms of the targets?
No, Taysom Hill will steal some of Kamara's upside, 100%. And in knowing that he was relying on those touchdowns and those dump downs from Drew Brees, Taysom Hill didn't do it as much. And again, the Saints, it's not just they have a little bit of a cap issue. No, they have a lot of issue. Even removing Drew Brees, like with the reconstructing and all the stuff that he did, there's $65 million over the cap right now.
It's a staggering number.
Yeah. No. There's only 4 teams that are $18 million over, so they're by far and away in the worst spot ever. The Eagles are at $41 million negative, so it's like that's basically just goes to show you how bad the Saints are right now. And the only other option I think the Saints have right now is Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston is someone that's going to have to, last year when the NFL salary cap was bigger, when teams had cap room, Jameis Winston, what did he take? A 1-year, $2 million deal from the Saints? Is that what it was?
I thought it was 1 million, but I could be wrong.
It might be. It might be. But so there, it goes to show you, and there was nothing this year that happened with Jameis Winston that's going to make teams believe that he's going to be deserving of more, especially with the salary cap issues. So Jameis Winston's a guy that's going to have to go to a team that has salary cap issues, and it makes sense that he would go to the Saints because he's one Taysom Hill injury away from getting the start. He might be the starter. It might just be like, hey, we have to we have to reconfigure the offense for Jameis Winston to be our starter. So that's why we didn't play him in the middle of the year because he's a different quarterback than Drew Brees. And to be fair, Jameis Winston doesn't really help Alvin Kamara all that much because he was never really a dump down type passer. He was a guy that was willing to take chances down the field, throw interceptions, the exact opposite of Drew Brees. So I am worried about Kamara, and I would probably be torn today if I were drafting between Alvin Kamara and Ezekiel Elliott.
Okay. All right. I don't think, Zeke is tough for me, but that's a story for another time at this point. But look, let's keep moving here and get to more facts. But before we do, let me tell everybody about Magic Spoon cereal. Joe, do you remember when you appeared on that little podcast that we did, Game Changers? I think you might have been the last one. Yes, that was a
I changed the game completely, so you couldn't do another one after that. That's why.
It's correct. Yeah. You are the game changer to end all game changers. Well, I like to ask people dumb questions on it. And one of them, which I asked, not you, Joe, I don't think, maybe I did, but I remember asking Chris Harris, who appeared, if you could only take one food with you to a desert island, what would it be? And we both agreed that we would take cereal. We are assuming that we get some sort of magic refrigerator that keeps unlimited supplies of milk, cold, and everything like that, and a bowl and spoons. But cereal is the right answer. You're never disappointed. You can't screw it up. But I don't know, you've got this amazing desert island to yourself. You need to keep things tight. You need to stay around for a while. So you can't be going with those sugary, crazy cereals, and you can't go with those tasteless cereals just because they're healthy. But thankfully, there's Magic Spoon cereal because that gives you the best of both worlds. 4 flavors, each more delicious than the last. Frosted, blueberry, fruity, and cocoa. No sugar, 11 grams of protein, only 3 net grams of carbs in each serving. GMO friendly, gluten free, soy free, keto friendly. It is 100% guaranteed. So if you are on that desert island and you do not like it for any reason, they will give you your money back. Now, I don't know what that's going to do for you if you're on the desert island, but that offer also applies to if you are a regular human being on regular land. Go to magicspoon.com/fantasypros. Grab a variety pack. Use our code FantasyPros. You will get free shipping. That's magicspoon.com/fantasypros. Use the code FantasyPros for free shipping. All right, Joe, next fact that blew you away. Go ahead.
Well, number 15 certainly made me feel really good about some instincts that I'm having about 2021, and it's a stat about A.J. Dillon. He broke 18 tackles on 48 touches. That's a broken tackle once every 2.67 touches. No other running back with 25-plus touches average a broken tackle more than 3.10 touches. So I know what my eyes saw in some of those playoff games where A.J. Dillon was carrying dudes for 5 yards. I saw it. I also saw an offense with Aaron Rodgers the last 2 seasons that made Aaron Jones a top 10 running back 2 years in a row. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm all in on the A.J. Dillon bandwagon. And this is a guy that I think that, slowly as the season went on, you saw him get some more carries. You saw him get some carries in some bigger spots. You saw what he's able to do in some moments when he was called upon in the playoffs too, especially when Aaron Jones got hurt. So for me, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, we're able to kind of turn the page here. It also helps him in savings because Aaron Jones is going to go walk and go somewhere else in free agency. I think Williams is a free agent too, if memory serves. So A.J. Dillon's going to have somebody else in that backfield, but A.J. Dillon's going to be, I think, the man in that backfield. And when you see a stat like this, all it does is confirm not just, the eye test, but also statistically, which is what you love. You got to balance those two things if you're going to play fantasy. You can't just do the stats because what you're seeing in the games play out matters so much in terms of evaluation as well, because it gives you more information along with the stat. It informs the stat in a lot of ways and vice versa. So I think that you want to combine those two things. And when you do, I think it all comes out to a player that I'm very bullish on going into 2021.
Well, we're doing a listener, mailbag question at the very end of the show, but there was a question about this, so I'll read it now, and it was from Kirby Tags. Assuming that Aaron Jones does leave Green Bay, do you think that Jamal Williams will be back with the Packers and be the primary carrier, or do you think that, the question reads, I can see him and Dillon being like Kamara and Ingram in the LaFleur offense. So what do you expect to see next year, Tags, in the Green Bay backfield?
I expect Dillon to be the lead guy there. I do think that Aaron Jones is going to be gone. They were trying to get a contract done, and they broke off talks mid-December, and Aaron Jones actually hired a new agent. It's Drew Rosenhaus, a guy that's going to go get him the money. So this was probably the last hurrah for Aaron Jones with Green Bay, and he's going to go off and do big things, wherever he's going to go. I think the Bills and the Dolphins are two of the landing spots that I would predict. But A.J. Dillon, you don't draft a running back in the second round and not have big plans for him. I think this year was more like, hey, we didn't have a preseason. Aaron Jones is on the roster. Right. Jamal Williams. These guys are they're free agents next year. Let's use them up. Let's use them and abuse them. Whereas A.J. Dillon, it's like, again, you drafted him in the second round when it was a strength on your team. It was almost like planning ahead when you had a team that was built to go for a Super Bowl now, which was an idiotic pick. Yes. But they have to try and make up for that. So
sure, that's
where I do believe A.J. Dillon. Any running back alongside Aaron Rodgers is going to have fantasy value. You go back like Ryan Grant, and then you go to Eddie Lacy, and then you fast forward, you get to Aaron Jones, and you're just like, even Jamal Williams. When Aaron Jones was out of the lineup, Jamal Williams was a stud.
Yep.
So if A.J. Dillon is that dude, and they draft a running back, and they just basically have another guy behind him, like a Dexter Williams, or just just a guy, A.J. Dillon's going to have a lot of fantasy value.
Yeah, I am looking forward to seeing what he can do in that offense, as idiotic as you mentioned, Tags, as that pick was, given what the Packers situation was. All right, Tags, next fact. Go ahead. What do you like?
All right, so I'm going to go with this one. There's only one wide receiver in the NFL who's finished with at least 2.65 yards per route in each of the last 2 seasons. That player's A.J. Brown. So just to go to show you, those are his first 2 years in the league, and somebody might be asking that's listening and saying, what is yards per route run like? How is that predictive, and what does it mean? The best way I could describe this is that over the last 10 years, there's only one wide receiver who's finished with more than 2.60 yards per route run in more than 4 seasons, and we've had a lot of good wide receivers over the last 10 years. Julio Jones is the only one. Yep. The only one. The next up is Antonio Brown with 4 such seasons. So basically,
that was my guess. My guess was Antonio Brown. It's funny that he was 2.
But the thing is, you look at A.J. Brown, you say his rookie year, he wasn't even a starter to begin the year, and it's like when he finally got on the field, he just started producing, and it's like, okay, that's cool. And then you get to his second year, and you're like, all right, he's gonna take a step forward, and then we find out he needs surgery on both of his knees.
Yes.
Like, to know that he played through that and he still did this, it's just remarkable, and it just goes to show you this guy is a bona fide superstar. And if you were like, let's say that you're in a startup draft right now, and if you wanted to take A.J. Brown as a top 3 wide receiver in dynasty drafts, I would not argue with you.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned yards per route run, because that is something that I have a lot of things when I'm thinking about it, because it is really, above all, Tags, I think, number one, it's highly correlated to fantasy success, and number 2, it's pretty sticky. Like, it's a sticky stat. It's something, that it is. It's something that you can rely on, which is why, Tags, again, I always tease you about A.J. Brown because of how high I was on him, and you weren't low on him, and you came around, especially at the end, towards draft season, but I was a little bit higher on him, and part of it was what he did as a rookie in yards per route run, and again, he did that again, but that does lead me then into my next fact, which is around A.J. Brown as well, and this was the one that I was looking into myself, and then I looked, and of course, Tags had it already, and it's fact number 146. The Titans had 2 of the top 5 wide receivers in yards per route run. A.J. Brown was number 3. Corey Davis was number 5. The only other team with 2 receivers inside the top 15 were the Falcons, with Julio Jones at number 4 and Calvin Ridley at number 8. So A.J. Brown, as we mentioned, 2.65. Corey Davis, 2.58. And Tags, you mentioned also in your article another fact that Corey Davis had 10.7 yards per target. So let's talk about Corey Davis for a second, because we know A.J. Brown's a stud. We don't know. I mean, I know they declined his 5th-year option. Kind of feels like hopefully they'll find a way to bring him back. But, I mean, I think, Tags, we've talked about it's probably either him or Jonnu Smith, not both necessarily. But with let's assume, I guess, let me ask you this, Tags. Do you think he's going to be back with the Titans? And if so, can we expect the same thing again? We have this whole issue with the fact that Arthur Smith is leaving, but I don't know whether or not that will matter given that their offense is so efficient. I don't know why they changed all that much. So I guess answer those 2 questions in terms of what we look at for Corey Davis next year.
I mean, it would make all the sense in the world for them to get a deal done with him, because he obviously has chemistry with the quarterback. He's worked with them. He's a good complement to A.J. Brown. But can the Titans admit that they made a mistake? Because they're going to pay for that mistake, essentially. But with someone like Corey Davis, you have to wonder. I think free agents right now, like Corey Davis is a tier 2 wide receiver in free agency. He's not like a top tier guy that people are going to find a way to make a whole bunch of cap room for. I think guys like Corey Davis are hitting free agency at the worst possible time.
Yep.
And I think it would be best for him from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint to take another deal with the Titans, because he does have that chemistry now building with Ryan Tannehill. He could build off what he did last year and then enter free agency as fans get back in the stadium, as NFL teams start to get that revenue back, as salary caps start to go up. I know that we're doing a stat show right now, but I really have a feeling that this offseason is going to change the landscape of the NFL. And I say that as I started looking into salary caps right now and the teams that have space and the teams that don't. Basically, the teams that have space right now, they're going to be able to afford whatever free agent they want. Because they're going to get them on discounted deals because the salary cap's coming down. Those escalating contracts, there's going to be players cut off rosters that you did not expect to be cut.
Right.
J.J. Watt, the sports world was freaking out because, why did the Texans, it just goes to show how disrupted they are as a franchise. They were going to cut J.J. Watt. Like, J.J. Watt asking for his release made him look better because he asked for his release, in quotes.
Yep.
But they were going to cut him. If you were paying attention, there was no way they were going to be able to carry his salary. So there's a lot of things this offseason. But Corey Davis, again, rather than take that tier 2 deal with less money than usual on a 4-year deal somewhere, I would rather him say, hey, I'm going to take a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal to kind of prove myself that it was no fluke in 2020 and earn a bigger paycheck once the salary caps go back up.
Joe, real quick, if Davis does leave the Titans, I mean, it obviously depends on where he would go, but I guess, Tags, you were always kind of a Corey Davis defender in past years. Like, you liked his talent, stuff like that. Joe, do you think he has just the raw talent to be an impact wide receiver wherever he goes, or do you think also that he really would excel better if he stayed with the Titans?
Well, I was a Corey Davis defender too for a while, and then I had to give up because he just wasn't on the field. And I think that's the problem. And I think if you're the Titans right now, you look at this wide receiver class in the draft, and you look at the depth there, and you also look at what's around and the teams that have cap space. And I think Corey Davis might be one of those guys that might get paid actually more than people realize because of the good season he have, because of that potential and putting it all together. And I think if you're the Titans, you look at it and, Derrick Henry's there. Tannehill has been great. And that was the other takeaway, too. When you read these 175 facts, there's a few in there about Tannehill and how good he's been. And me as the quarterback guy has always been talking about Tannehill now for a year and change. And I think even last year we got on the podcast, Tags and I were talking about, it'd be great in Superflex. Everybody should go out there and put some shares on Tannehill to take over that job for Mariota. And sure enough, he did. And sure enough, the rest is history. And I think that when you couple all those things, there might be, I don't want to say hubris, but I think there's a confidence with the Titans that they can operate without Corey Davis because 2 years ago they did. And I think he's just a bonus. He's a nice player to have. He's certainly useful. He had some great stats. He had some fantastic big games there. But I don't know if it's enough where they want to invest. I think if you're the Titans, your number one investment has got to be looking at trying to get more pass rush. And if that means going out and signing a J.J. Watt, or it means going out there and signing somebody else that gets kind of jettisoned from another team, I'm concerned that Corey Davis might get overpaid actually based off this one good season and all the potential. And looking back, is he a good investment with all the time that he's missed? And I think that's a real question. So I'm on the fence about Corey Davis in terms of where he's going to end up and how. But if I had to pick right now, I actually think he's not going to come back with the Titans. I think somebody's going to look at him, see that season, see the potential, try to make him a 1 or try to make him maybe pay him more than he might be worth. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be where he ends up.
All right. So, Joe, even though apparently based on this podcast, most people are thinking that 125 of Tag's 175 facts are about the Titans, that's not actually true. We've got plenty
The rest
to
are all
from.
about Devontae Adams.
All right, Joe, non-Devontae Adams, non-Titan stat. Go ahead. What's your pick a fact from Tag's article?
All right, here's one. 172, which proves that I read all of them, right? Because I have gone all the way down to this. So there were just been 3 single seasons where a quarterback has rushed for 1,000 yards. And Lamar Jackson has 2 of them, which is the last 2 seasons. Oddly enough, he doesn't have a single season where he's finished with the most rushing touchdowns, and I thought this was fascinating. And it's partially because of, they've had Mark Ingram and guys like that, but I think really what this stat tells me is, for those people who might still be concerned about J.K. Dobbins a little bit, there's also some really good Dobbins facts too. In fact, there's one that where he compares to Nick Chubb very favorably in some deeper stats, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. But there's some people that worry, it's if Lamar's running all the time, it hurts the running backs. And I just want to shake people and say, have you been watching the Baltimore Ravens? Now, right. I think that they need to bring in an Allen Robinson, Adam Thielen type wide receiver to give him a real steady guy, a guy who can get open on his own. That's what you need. A guy who's a great route runner, can get open on his own a little bit, and you need to also get some better guys in the offensive line who are better at creating a pocket, because this is a good offensive line for running the football, not so great in terms of pocket creation from the quarterback standpoint. So to me, this stat tells you two things. Number one, Lamar Jackson's doing a phenomenal job of running the football and flipping that switch in the second half and just saying, look, this is our identity. This is who we are. We don't have the personnel to be something other than that. Now, this offseason, they might create that personnel. But I don't think at the same time you're going to lose the equity you have in Dobbins and the things that you like about him, because I think that you're going to see him continue to emerge as the number one running back in this offense, and you shouldn't worry about the touchdown equity he brings every week. Because why? He had that stretch where he had 6 weeks where he had 7 touchdowns in those last 6 weeks, and then on top of that, Lamar Jackson does not tend to be the guy who runs into the end zone. So to me, this was an interesting two-for fact that you got here.
I love it. I love the fact. Tags, I mean, what do we expect from Lamar Jackson necessarily next year? Is this, he turned it on at the end, as Joe said. Do we expect him basically to continue that into next year? And that's basically what the Ravens are probably not going to try to alter their offense, as it looked like they tried to do a little bit early in the season.
Well, what's funny, I mean, as his career goes on, you're naturally going to see his rushing attempts come down a little bit, because as quarterbacks get older, they're just going to lose some of that mobility.
Right.
Lamar Jackson's nowhere close to old, but you might see him lose a little bit. Dobbins is going to he's going to score touchdowns, but at the same time, you could read the stat and say, Lamar Jackson, maybe he has room for touchdown regression, like to the mean, to where he actually scores more rushing touchdowns in the future, because he is so elusive. And I think we started to see that a little bit more towards the end of the year, him rushing in touchdowns, because it was almost like he would have rather thrown it in back in 2019, 2020. He did have some rushing touchdowns, but he didn't lead the league. So I think you could take this stat a couple different ways, but bottom line is that Lamar Jackson, he's going to have that rushing upside, and if you were to add a receiver, I'm expecting them to go hard after Allen Robinson. I think Robinson would be a perfect complement to Marquise Brown. And if they don't get Allen Robinson, I could see them going after someone like Corey Davis as like a contingency plan, because you need that big-bodied possession-style receiver where you could have Marquise Brown kind of work down the field a little bit more and not be your go-to guy. Marquise Brown's a very good player, but he's not the prototype number one that you want to target 140 times in a season. So they do need that big-bodied wide receiver that can kind of bail Lamar Jackson out when he's under pressure. Just get the ball, throw it in 50-50 situations to that one wide receiver. So I think Lamar Jackson, I have as quarterback number 3 right now in my rankings. He's a guy that if you get him in like the 5th round, you're going to be really happy about it.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of that, and I do think that Allen Robinson is the exact type of receiver that they could use right now that would really benefit the offense. All right, Tags, go to you. What's another fact that you liked from your article?
All right. I'm going to stick with the yards per route run, because I think this one's important to understand, what you might be missing. George Kittle has averaged at least 2.82 yards per route run in each of his last 3 seasons. All right. That's a number that Travis Kelce has never hit in his career. Travis Kelce, actually 2.49 in 2020. That was his career high. So 2.49 yards per route run for Travis Kelce is a career high, whereas Kittle, 2.82 at least 2.82 each of the last 3 seasons. So if George Kittle stays healthy, George Kittle is breaking fantasy football similar to the way that Travis Kelce did this year. And obviously, depending on the quarterback situation and what they do, he's done that with Jimmy Garoppolo and Nick Mullins. You know what I mean? Like C.J. Beathard. So George Kittle is a game changer. And, this year I was torn between these two guys, where it's like you were trying to guess ahead. Kelce's now, 31, 32 years old.
Yep.
So that there's going to be a slight decline coming soon. It obviously didn't happen this year. But you're also expecting George Kittle to continue to take a step forward. So, those two are closer than I think some people realize in terms of like who you're going to be drafting. And rightfully so, people are saying Travis Kelce is a first-round draft pick next year. Okay, I'm down with that. But George Kittle is still a very, very much in the conversation of high-end second round.
All right, so Joe, let's assume that it's either Jimmy Garoppolo or somebody probably who's an upgrade, considering that's what they'll be looking to do if they move on from Jimmy G. Where do you feel like you'd be comfortable drafting Kittle next year?
Well, if it's Deshaun Watson, if that's the upgrade, then I'm willing to sign up for that. This is a tough one. I struggle with this because I love Kittle, and I love him as a dude too. He's a big wrestling guy. He's there at all the pay-per-views all the time, and he's just a fun, likable guy, and you just want to root for him. So this is where you gotta kind of put all that aside and look at the reality. And the reality, he has missed significant time. And look, that just happens sometimes. But when you're doing these drafts and you're making early investments on players, I think when you have a guy like Kittle, you recognize all the talent, and I think it's a matter of, do you want to take the sure thing with Kelce at somewhere around 10, 11, 12 overall, or like Mike's saying, do you want to kind of I guess here's the thing. I don't think you really have to make that kind of discretion. I think ADP and snake drafts is going to do that for you. You're going to basically, if you're going to be at the bottom, you're going to have a shot at Kelsey. You're not going to take Kittle there because Kelsey's there. And then you have to ask yourself, if you're 1, 2, 3 overall and Kittle makes it back to you in that next snake turn, do you want to take him or Waller? Do you really want to take a tight end at all? And I think it's up for debate. I think if you're starting probably with Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley or Dalvin Cook, you're already starting with a great player, but all 3 of those guys have injury risk. So do you want to put Kittle in there too? And I think it's a real question to ask yourself. And I think for me, the answer is probably that's a boomer bust team, maybe in a big time, like where it's like you're not first, you're last kind of league. Okay, that's fine. You can go for that kind of risk. Or if it's just playing for pride and having fun, okay. But if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to make those kind of early investments, I get it. I understand. You could take, the Logan Thomases of the world a little later at tight end and so they still come out pretty good, or Noah Fant or guys like that have some upside. But I think this question gets answered for you. It's auction where I think things change. And for auction purposes, that's where I become way more interested in Kittle, because you're going to get a discount because of the injuries, and the upside that Mike's talking about goes right to the fact of, okay, I could maybe get Travis Kelce, but maybe at an $8 difference of player. And that is significant as hell.
Yeah. For me right now, I have Kelce at 9. This is early, obviously, but I have Kelce at 9. I have Kittle at 21 and Waller at 23. So I'm comfortable taking them at that change. And again, it was part of Tags. We argued a lot with Yates, or at least I did, about when to take the tight end. And Yates, because he loved Jonnu Smith so much, basically, he was always waiting on tight end and he wouldn't pull the trigger. But for me, taking Kelce in particular in the second round this year was basically a league winner at this point because he gave you such an advantage. So for me, I'm willing to go with the injury risk even there, because it probably means, like you said, Joe, that you've gotten one of the early running backs and you've gotten that foundation. I think you can take that risk. But it's a great stat on Kittle, who's awesome. Tags, I'm so happy that you've gone the yards per route run route. I have to say route, by the way. This my natural inclination is to say route, because that's where I always go as well. And a big part of it was, I remember, defending A.J. Brown last year and what he did as a rookie. So I want to talk about another rookie, not quite A.J. Brown level, but who had a really, really solid season in that regard, and that's Chase Claypool. So, I mean, he didn't play much to start, right? And then when he did really get involved, then all of a sudden they pulled back on his snaps to prevent him from hitting the rookie wall. But he finished overall as a 19th ranked receiver. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything. We know that. But in large part, that was thanks to fact number 37, where Chase Claypool was the only wide receiver with a 4-touchdown game in 2020. But we look at yards per route run. And I remember when I was looking at A.J. Brown last year, that somebody at PFF, I'm sorry, I don't remember the author, wrote a great article about rookie wide receivers and their yards per route run. And when you surpass or equal the 2 yards per route run threshold, that's a really good harbinger for good things to come in year 2 and beyond. It's like a very, there's a clear delineation between over that line and under that line. And if you look at the Steelers this year, Juju Smith-Schuster, 1.3 yards per route run, not great. Deontay Johnson, 1.76 yards per route run, better. But Chase Claypool, exactly 2 yards per route run. That's kind of the magic number. He was also second in air yards per route run, behind only Calvin Ridley, and 9th in fantasy points per route run. So this is something where, assuming especially if Juju Smith-Schuster doesn't come back and Roethlisberger comes back, which I am working under the assumption, man, Chase Claypool is a guy who I think big things are in store for next year. Tags, what do you think about Claypool?
I like Claypool, but I think there's a lot of question marks, though. I mean, with Pouncey retiring, you have to wonder, Roethlisberger and them, those two talked about that they were tied together. And will Roethlisberger walk away? I mean, it's possible. I mean, he's a big guy, taking a lot of hits over the years. Second half of the season, he kind of fell apart. He looked like a different quarterback. I remember watching him against the Bengals, and thinking, what happened? What happened to this team? Mm-hmm. They kind of fell apart. So I wouldn't be shocked if Ben walked away. You have Rivers walking away, Breeze, and he's always in that same conversation with those guys. So if he walks away, it's going to change a lot of things, because apparently the Steelers are sold on Mason Rudolph being a competent backup, which I don't understand that.
Don't forget Dwayne Haskins.
Oh,
that's true. That's right. I will say that my optimism about Claypool is certainly dependent on non-Dwayne Haskins.
Well, what? I want to throw this out there to you guys too, because to a certain extent, those numbers are not, I won't say skewed, but informed by how bad the offensive line did play last year. Yep. Ben Roethlisberger had a record-setting year in terms of how fast he got rid of the football, and that was because if he didn't, he was going to die. And I think that's a big part of it, plus the inability of them to really get the run game going in any capacity. So if they address the offensive line in the draft, if they can make the right moves to get the running game back up to speed, I imagine that there's room for improvement, Mike. Would you think, on the numbers of not even just Claypool, but also Deontay Johnson too, potentially, in terms of that route percentage?
Well, the question is like, what are they going to do to fix it? You know, the offensive line, basically Roethlisberger, he wasn't sacked a whole lot, but the run game, they got no push up front.
No, zero.
Now Pouncey retiring, Villanueva, they're saying that they're not going to re-sign him. They're starting left tackle, and it's like you're going to move Okafor over to left. I don't know what they're doing. I think the Steelers can be a hot mess on offense this year, and Claypool was a guy that they were predominantly using downfield rather than using him all over the field. I like Deontay Johnson quite a bit more just because he does those intermediate routes. Yep. He's a guy that was consistently seeing targets, but is Juju gone? Because if Juju's gone, it's like that frees up a whole bunch of targets. And
I think Juju's absolutely gone.
Well, that's correct. You think he's gone, Joe, you said?
Oh, I think Juju's gone, absolutely. And I was a Deontay guy going into this year. I had all the shares of Deontay Johnson, CeeDee Lamb, all those guys. Like that, those were my dudes. And Calvin Ridley, those are my, like, the guys that I had. And I just feel like, Mike's right. Like, Deontay's still that safety blanket for Ben. I don't think Ben's going anywhere. I think Ben's going to come back one more time. I don't think he wants to leave on the... I can't see Big Ben walking away with a loss to the Browns. Like, I know that sounds like, silly in a way, but I just can't. I can't see him walking away on that.
Well, there's also, I mean, really, when you think about it, as much as like our opinion of the Steelers, go back 8 weeks ago, whatever, 10 weeks ago, whatever it was, people were like, well, this team has a legitimate chance to be an undefeated team at this point. And part of it was that their defense was decimated by injury, and so they couldn't compete on that end.
When Devin Bush got hurt, everything changed. When they lost their signal caller on defense, I thought that was a huge thing, and nobody wanted to talk about it, I felt like. And you could circle it from that point on, and then Dupree got hurt right after, and then it was kind of a downward spiral thereafter, and the offense couldn't overcome it.
Right. And again, they figure, I mean, it became a little predictable, which was Ben is not going to take a sack, no matter what. So he's going to get that ball out in 2 seconds, and everybody knew it, and so they started crowding. I do think with that, I think it's difficult for Ben to basically be like, man, this looked like we were a Super Bowl team, and then we fell apart in this almost embarrassing fashion. I agree with Joe that I don't think he's ready to hang it up based on that. I think he comes back for another year, and like Joe, I assume that Juju is not coming back, and if so, then I'm really high on Claypool coming into the year because I love his talent, and I think that if they kind of take the reins off, he could really be a monster. All right, Joe, let's get to your next interesting fact. What do you got?
All right, number 144, Stephon Diggs. He led all wide receivers with 166 targets. That's the lowest number for a league leader since 1998. His 166 targets ranked just 24th highest over the last 10 years. But I just want to highlight Stephon Diggs really for a second, too, because I'm trying to remember a time where you just took a wide receiver for one team, dropped him in with a young quarterback, and you just had this explosion the way you had between Diggs and Allen. And I think it tells you, too, like, he was so good this year, and that number, even though it led the league, is not as high as some other numbers have been previously. And I think that's stunning, too. And I think, kind of get lost in the shuffle of all the things this year is just how good Stephon Diggs was and how amazing that transition really became. And you could make in terms of the offseason of last year, it might have been the most important offseason move that any team had made. And I think Stephon Diggs, I don't know if it can get better, but I also don't think it's necessarily going to fade away either. So people are kind of struggling right now with, well, where do we evaluate Diggs? Well, I don't want to put him at the very top because that's where Adams is. And, do you want to put him ahead of guys who have done it more than once? But I think Stephon Diggs going into next year is just as good of an investment as it looks on paper. And I just want people to kind of believe in it a little bit because I do think what you saw to Josh Allen was the real deal. I know in the playoffs you started to see Josh Allen being the guy who would try too hard to make a play and run back 30 yards and instead of just taking a sack or throwing the ball away. You saw bad Josh Allen a little bit there, the Josh Allen of 18 and 19 and things you didn't want to see again. But for the most part in 2020, you saw a really good version, and him and Stephon Diggs together was just magical. And I don't want people to dismiss that as a one-year wonder because I don't think it is.
I do want to talk about this, and Tags, I'm going to just give, it's not even a firm fact necessarily, but something that I was going to talk about, which goes to the Bills, and then I want to hear your opinion on it. Josh Allen was brilliant last year, and Stephon Diggs made a huge difference, but there was like a pretty big difference in how he performed against man versus zone. I mean, he had 37 touchdowns and 10 interceptions on the year passing, and against zone, he had 11 touchdowns and 8 of those 10 interceptions. And Diggs's sort of performance in general, like his targets and his, his yards per target and everything like that went down kind of heavily against zone. There, it wasn't always like that. I mean, he tore up the 49ers and everything like that. So there were certainly things, but it did seem like, against zone defenses, he struggled a little bit more. And I wonder whether or not now with a full year of looking at Allen taking this huge growth with Diggs and everything like that, whether opposing defenses change up a little bit of the way they go against him. So Tags, I guess, generally speaking, outlook on Allen and Diggs going into next year.
I like Diggs a lot, and I think you've seen over the last 3 years. Joe was saying you just dropped him into a new situation, and what he did, it was almost like the Vikings didn't even know what they had, even though they displayed what they had over a span of 2 years. And it's the easiest way to show it is that he played possession style receiver in 2018. He caught 102 passes, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns. All right, he averaged 10 yards per reception. He was basically the possession style receiver that year. Then you go to 2019, they only targeted him 94 times that year, even though Adam Thielen was out majority of the time. He averaged 17.9 yards per reception. He can get open deep. He can get open underneath. He can get open. Stephon Diggs is a route runner. He is, and I said it before he went to Buffalo.
You did.
That Stephon Diggs, if he got the targets that Antonio Brown got, Stephon Diggs would be respected like Antonio Brown is in the fantasy industry and in real NFL. So I've always liked Diggs. I love that Buffalo figured out how to use him. But I think this is not only the zone defense thing. I think it's not only Josh Allen, but it's also something on Diggs because Diggs is more of a route runner than he is like the most intelligent route runner. You know what I mean? There's certain receivers that understand how to sit in the zone, how to play those zones, how to kind of manipulate it, right? Whereas like Travis Kelce, one of the smartest dudes ever when it comes to figuring out where to sit in the zone and where to go, and him and Mahomes have connected on that, whereas Diggs and Allen haven't yet. Maybe that's something that takes a little bit more time. But
imagine if they do. Imagine if that's the wrinkle. Imagine if they could fix that, what it's going to be.
I feel like you mentioned that about maybe Calvin Ridley 2 years ago. Was that? Am I remembering that right? Yeah, right. So but you said it, Joe. Imagine if they get that part figured out. Because also the Bills are awesome. Like I loved. It was great to sort of it's a fun team. It was great to see Allen.
And this year, do they play the East, right? NFC East, right, with the schedule, right? Because they played the West this past year, or am I thinking incorrectly?
I have not looked at it yet.
Yeah, no, me neither.
If that's the case too, I mean, geez. There's going to be another 4 games in there you're going to just love.
All right, Taggies, let's get to your next stat. Go ahead.
All right, I said this one in another show, but I'm going to say it again because this is the show actually for it. I think it just needs to be emphasized. The list of quarterbacks over the last 10 years who have thrown at least 100 pass attempts and not completed more than 52% of their pass attempts. The list of quarterbacks is Josh Freeman, Tim Tebow, Bryce Petty, Drew Stanton, Caleb Haney, Blaine Gabbert, Seneca Wallace, Ryan Lindley, and yours truly, Jalen Hurts. So that's a problem. Okay. I mean, Jalen Hurts showed fantasy appeal, but basically, if you're lumped in with those quarterbacks, in terms from an accuracy standpoint in the NFL, it's a small sample size. I'm not going to jump overboard here, but I also want to warn people, if you're doing best ball drafts right now, to draft Jalen Hurts and rely on him as your starter, I don't think there's any guarantee he's the starter. If the Eagles are really wanting 2 first-round picks for Carson Wentz, I don't think he's going anywhere. And I think they're going to be stuck with him. Carson Wentz is a better quarterback, like in terms of passer, than Jalen Hurts. Sure. Now, I know he didn't look like it last year, but Jalen Hurts, to be in this crowd, it is really worrisome, and it's basically just me warning people, don't go all in on Jalen Hurts, whether it be a Dynasty, Superflex format. In the end, there's a reason that people are, even if they move Wentz, people are mocking the Eagles to take a quarterback in the draft because they don't know if they have the answer at the quarterback position.
Yeah, so we talked to Matthew Friedman of the Action Network last week, and he loved Hurts, right? He had him 7th, I believe, in his quarterback rankings for 2021. So Joe, I mean, there are questions. Carson Wentz is still on the team. Maybe they'd bring in a veteran who knows exactly what they do. But right now, what's your thought on Hurts, at least in the short term, for like next year?
Well, look, in the short term, obviously you need the job, first of all. And I did read something today, too, where I saw they were kicking the tires, talking about whether or not Fields might be the quarterback for them and maybe moving up to do that. So there's still a lot of questions about that. I like some of the things you see out of Hurts. And in college, too, when you go back and watch Hurts, what I love so much is, he's got that other gear. He's got that thing where, he come out there and he brings a certain level of athleticism and excitement to things. And I think that that's great. And he's also that kid who says, oh, yeah, watch me. And I love quarterbacks like that. Tom Brady's made a legendary career out of being, oh yeah, watch me. So I like that intangible, non-stat factor that Jalen Hurts brings. And I think that's something to not lose in this conversation, because he was kind of thrown out there, and he was thrown out into the same terrible offensive line that Carson Wentz was thrown out to. So no matter what, you still have to fix that. So you can't love Jalen Hurts and at the same time want to just, think that, Carson Wentz is the worst quarterback ever. They were both playing within the same confines to a certain extent. Different styles of play, yes. But to me, I don't have him as a QB1 right now, just because you don't have to. And I think when you're looking at the rest of now in Superflex leagues, he becomes way more interesting to me. And I play a lot of Superflex. I'm the king of Superflex. That's what that belt says behind me. So I think that, when you're evaluating Jalen Hurts right now, I think you still want to look at a couple things, which is what are the Eagles doing to fix that line, number one. And number two, are they willing to really just hand over the job to him? Because if they're even discussing that question mark, I think it should give everybody else pause in evaluating him in fantasy. Because if the organization's questioning him, then why are you balls to the wall excited about having him or putting him as QB5 or some crazy thing like that? It's just not necessary. And it's one thing to want to be proactive and looking at guys and liking guys. And look, Black Book was very favorable in years past to Lamar Jackson, but a lot of people were not. Very favorable to Josh Allen. I think I tweeted that 2008 rookie review we had of him if he could be the best quarterback in this class. And people laughed at me when I wrote that. But you know what? No one's laughing right now when you're looking at where Josh Rosen is and a couple of the other guys. I think what you want to do is just be careful. You don't want to elevate Jalen Hurts just because you want to make a statement, especially when it's not necessary, when the quarterback pool is so good that you can still take Tom Brady as a 12th overall quarterback and still go out there and win a league. So right now, again, it's hard to evaluate. It's hard to say anything about Jalen Hurts because the Eagles are still working it all out. So let the dust settle, and then we can come back and have that conversation, because right now it's all futile.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair point. Trying to guess exactly how it's going to look is a little, premature at this point. All right, let's each do one more fact. And, we don't have to go crazy with it. I want to get to a couple of listener questions. So let's go around the table. Joe, start us off with your final brilliant Mike Teglier fact.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's Mike's brilliance. I'm just reading Mike's brilliance, and I sound smart reading what Mike said, which is great. Mike, I want you to write all my shows here. I'm here at Fantasy Pros, and then I'll just say things and everything. Joe's so smart. Number 66, continuing another fact. Nick Chubb were the average NFL running back, he would have finished with just 740 rushing yards this season instead of 1,067. Now, going back to the one before that, based on how many defenders were in the box, how many yards before contact did Nick Chubb have? He averaged 1.75 more yards per carry than he was expected to, which led the league. And I just want to say, I don't think we gave enough respect to Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb missed a couple games last year and still finished as an RB1. And another bold prediction from last year's shows here on Fantasy Pros was that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb would both finish as RB1s. And guess what? They did in PPR. Hooray. Yeah,
Kareem Hunt sucked.
He did suck towards the end, but he was really good in the first.
Oh, boy. All right, don't get the stack started.
But here the point is this. Let us not dismiss how good Nick Chubb is. Let's not worry about who else is in the backfield. Let's recognize that the only way for the Browns to continue to go forward and be as good as they were last year is to continue to keep Baker Mayfield simple. Let him run that play action, run Chubb, be smart, focus where he's throwing the football instead of letting Baker Mayfield trying to be reckless at the football and trying to make all these reads of the defense. It's not his strong suit. What he got away with in college, he does not get away with in the pros. But when you focus Baker Mayfield and you're able to run that play action effectively, he can be a decent enough quarterback to obviously get you into the playoffs and win games. And more to the point, that means Nick Chubb is the focal point of the offense, just like Derrick Henry, and I think one of the safer picks out there.
And Nick Chubb was so good this whole year. I felt like Tags, we just talked about it so much. So, yeah, all right, it's great. All right, we don't have to dwell on it. We know Nick Chubb is amazing. Tags, go to your last stat.
All right, so this goes back to kind of what we talked about with Derrick Henry, and it's something I brought up about David Montgomery before last year, saying basically just follow those touches. Basically he was being drafted at his floor. This is one for wide receivers. Touches are touches, targets are targets. Mm-hmm. You could be on a bad team, and if you're getting targets, you're still definitely worthy of being drafted in fantasy. There have been 229 wide receivers who have seen 115 plus targets over the last 10 years. Just 10 of them, that's 4%, did not finish as a wide receiver 3 or better. And none of them have come in the last 4 years. So over the last 4 years, you get 115 targets, you're a wide receiver 3 or better automatically. So therefore, even if a guy plays for the Jets, even if he plays for some of these bad football teams that we talk about, if they get targets, they're draftable. That's basically what it comes down to. Just don't. It was part of the reason that I think we all liked Henry Ruggs this year, most of us anyway, just because we felt like there were targets to go around, and unfortunately they didn't go there. But typically you can figure out where targets are going to go, and it's like, all right, I don't love this guy, but he's going to get targets, so therefore he could be a value later in drafts.
But the thought process was sound, because didn't Aguilar basically become what you were hoping?
He did, but he also, I don't even think he got the targets.
He didn't. I mean, he didn't get a ton, but like he was able to. I mean, he surprised the hell out of a lot of us. I can tell you that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aguilar led the team with 82 targets.
Right.
So he did. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. And some drops probably as well. Yeah, I mean, this is great. And Tags, it strikes me as like we need to let's start a little series or an article about receivers who we project, because you do preseason project. Are you going to do that again this year, Tags? Preseason projections?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Me too. Let's talk about everybody who we have projected to go over the 115 target threshold and make a case for them. That's a great article. We're going to write that together, me and you. My final stat. I'm just really a fan.
When he says
stat.
me and you, he means you, I think, Mike.
That is
just
correct. That is the
there.
correct answer.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's finish up for me with Justin Jefferson, who just, again, really all this shows is that Justin Jefferson is awesome. Tags. Fact number 48, 2.99 yards per route run from the slot. That was behind Devontae Adams only, and they were the only two receivers who averaged more than 2.41 yards per route run from the slot. But again, you don't have to stop just at the slot. He was second behind Devontae Adams in yards per route run with 2.66. That was basically what A.J. Brown averaged on his rookie season as well. And if you start that at week 3, by the way, which is when he really became sort of more of a regular player, snaps went up a bit, he was at 2.77 yards per route run for the rest of the season. And he had a grade of 90.4 from PFF. That was second only to, of course, Devontae Adams. So it's basically like Devontae Adams, who is littered throughout this fact sheet, and really Justin Jefferson right behind him. Tags. I mean, we talk about how Adam Thielen became more touchdown dependent, obviously, throughout the year, and Gary Kubiak is gone, but Clint Kubiak is there, so we assume that the system's going to remain the same. How high would you draft Justin Jefferson next year in terms of receivers?
I have him at number 8 right now.
Yep.
I'm all in on him. Basically, he's a tail end of the second, high end third round pick.
Yeah, I am at 8 as well. I mean, Joe, does that sound about right to you? Late second, early third?
Yeah, I think that's actually exactly where we had him on the last game day of the season on Sports Grid. So yeah, I mean, right around there, because and it's unfortunate, but if Kirk Cousins could ever just get off to a good start for once. If you look at the last 2 years, I mean, the last 2 Septembers for Kirk Cousins are just brutal. And all of a sudden, there's like this switch that flips, and he's really good until you get to the games that matter in December, and then it falls apart again. So there's that window of about 10 weeks where it's just amazing. And Justin Jefferson was the beneficiary of it this year. So yeah, like I'm a big believer in Justin Jefferson. And I got to tell you the truth, like I thought he was going to be good, but I never thought he would be as good as he was this year. And I don't think anybody did. Guy was just unbelievable, and it's a credit to him and the work ethic that he put in.
Yeah, and Tags and I talked about this at the end of the year, but how much I faded rookie wide receivers coming into this year, because I thought with the offseason, with the lack of preseason games, but man, so many of them, none better than Jefferson, really just were incredible this year. All right, let's finish up with some listener mailbag questions. These were on Twitter. Tags tweeted out. A lot of people replied. I will get to as many as I can. From Bogi Sira, I hope I pronounced that right. Sorry. Are people overvaluing the change in team for Matthew Stafford? I feel like he'll do better in LA with the weapons, but that defense is not going to require him to play a lot of catch-up football. Tags, go ahead. Thoughts on Stafford next year?
Oh, it definitely gives him value. You saw what happened to Jared Goff. I think people forgot what Jared Goff was before Sean McVay got there. And McVay's going to be able to do some things that he couldn't do with Jared Goff with Matthew Stafford. So it does give him value, but again, he's not a mobile quarterback, so it's almost like best case scenario, he's Tom Brady from 2020. You know what I mean? So are people going to overvalue him? Maybe a little bit, but I think he's still that guy that you take as a back-end QB1, high-end QB2 that you can probably pair with someone like a Taysom Hill or Jalen Hurts in case those guys kind of just break out. And you have that guy, one of those guys to trade away. But, yeah, I'm okay with him as like a back-end QB1, high-end QB2.
Yeah, I have his QB12 personally. Like I think the same thing. And I think the other thing you want to say is that when you're looking at this, think of all the mistakes that Jared Goff made, right? That ended up actually hurting the fantasy totals, even though the fantasy totals Mike are pointing out were pretty good sometimes despite all the mistakes. Imagine a quarterback in a situation where he's going to make less mistakes, and I think that there's a slight uptick. I don't want to say overrate. I don't want to put him in that elite category, of course, because he's not running at all, and he's an older quarterback, and he does have back issues. But I think that if you just put in a better quarterback who's a little bit more mistake or I should say less mistake prone, then I think it's a really good landing spot there. And you should be excited about Stafford, but don't overrate him at the same point.
All right, Joe, you can lead us off with this one from Dave. Because of Lamar Jackson's rushing abilities and the lack of check down passes, what is J.K. Dobbins' ceiling for 2021?
See, I have Dobbins as an RB1 going into the season, and we'll see where everybody shakes out after the draft and things like that. But I think his upside is somewhere around 9 or 8 overall if things really break right in terms of touchdown equity. Look, this offense is going to assert their dominance. I think they tried last year to get a little too fancy, and I think they kind of outthought themselves. I don't even think it was the other teams figured them out so much as they were trying to be an offense that they did not have the personnel for. Watch carefully in the offseason what they do with the offensive line and what kind of receivers they bring in, if any. And that will kind of dictate a little bit of this. But I think the upside for Dobbins, look, you saw the stretch run there. That's no joke. You saw how good Mark Ingram was a couple years ago. And you're putting a young, J.K. Dobbins out there with all that touchdown equity in a run-first attack. I think you really want to like Dobbins as a top 10 running back. And I don't think he's got the ceiling of a top 5 back, but I think somewhere between 5 and 10 would be the ceiling.
Tags, are you ranking him as a top 12 back as of right now?
I'm not. No, I'm not. He's not used enough in the passing game, and that's a fundamental thing with that team. Like it's the same offense they're going to run, and on top of that, they're going to have a wide receiver, whether it be through free agency or the draft. So I actually have Dobbins. I'm a little down on him. I have him as the RB17 right now. Could it go up? I don't think so. I mean, because Gus Edwards is good in his own right. I mean, right. Gus Edwards is going to be involved. Lamar Jackson's going to be involved, and we need those targets through the air for him because he's not a guy that's going to get 250 carries in a year.
Okay. From Robert, this is for you, Tags. Which tight end outside your top 12 right now, your top 12 rankings, do you think has the best chance of finishing inside the top 5 at the position, if any?
Tyler Higbee. Yeah. Just depending on what happens with Gerald Everett, but it seems like he's moving on because that team is another one in salary cap hell, where they kind of they're not going to have the money. So Higbee, we saw when Everett was out, Higbee was a stud. And now adding Matthew Stafford there. Stafford hasn't traditionally targeted his tight ends a whole lot, but we did see him prop up Hawkinson a little bit this year. So Higbee is someone that is there. And I think Cole Kmet is another guy that you could watch as like a sleeper in 2021. The Bears probably going to lose Allen Robinson, definitely going to get rid of Jimmy Graham. So, I mean, they're going to need some targets, and Cole Kmet looked good towards the end of last year.
Yeah.
Joe, do you agree with that one?
Well, Kmet was mine, so he already touched on it. So, once again, great minds, think alike. But Kmet was such a matchup disaster at Notre Dame for a lot of teams, and I think just a little bit more time. You rarely see a rookie tight end come and burst onto the scene and be good right away. And God knows the Bears had all kinds of other issues. But if they do end up with a Wentz, a guy who loves to throw the ball to the tight end, and Cole Kmet is there, that's a great fit potentially for him. So let's, again, wait and see how things kind of shake out there. But either way, I do think Kmet's that guy to kind of keep an eye on. He's a guy that I drafted last year in some dynasty leagues, hoping that, give him a year or two and maybe he can get up to speed and be that guy, because watching him at Notre Dame was very impressive.
All right, Joe, for you from Nicholas. Hope I'm not too late. You're not, Nicholas. Way to go. Has the Travis Fulgham hype train left the station for good? Is he worth a last pick in redraft, or is he a hold in dynasty?
Oh, God. Wait, so the question is, has it left the station for good?
Yes, that is correct.
I just don't know how hyped people are going to be about the Lions, right? About the, where
Eagles,
he was. Yeah. The Eagles. Here's the thing. I mean, if you look at the situation there, I don't think I'm going to go crazy and be... I think he's exactly where he should be, which is you want to take a dart on somebody later on, and I think that's fine, because he could have some success there. You saw him have some good games there when he came over to the Eagles, and I think that that's fair. But we've also seen this happen before where teams are in transition. We see a player kind of emerge, have a couple good games, and we go, okay, we're going to circle him for next year, and then a new coach comes in, a new regime comes in, and he's not even in the picture. And I think that's a reality that you just have to be ready for. And let's not forget that they did draft Jalen Reagor, and let's not forget that they did have those kind of other guys around there. I don't think you're ever going to get anything out of Alshon. I think he's done, and they're moving on from him too. But I look, he's a good dart throw, but Mike, anything else than that at this point, I don't think you should overhype him. Do you?
No, I don't think so. I mean
that's crazy.
It's rare to see a wide receiver being passed from team to team and then kind of break out the way he did, and then how quickly the Eagles seem to move on from him for no reason. Like Alshon Jeffrey hadn't done anything for them, but they felt the need to put him back. I didn't understand it. So I mean, do you drop him in Dynasty? I mean, if you have to make room for like a second, maybe even a third round pick, I probably would. But I mean, it really just depends on what you're dropping him for. But
all right, last
not
one.
a must-own.
Last one from KC. Why does Dan pronounce dolphins so awkwardly? Also, what is the ceiling for T. Higgins? Tags, I want to know, is this a thing? I assume he's talking about the team, not the mammal. And I don't know who I pronounce awkwardly.
Say it again.
Dolphin. No, I mean, I assume not the word dolphins. Is this a thing? Tua Tagovailoa, Savon Ahmed. That's how they're actually pronounced. Anyway, I didn't know if that was a thing. But
I thought you meant the actual name word dolphins. How do you say the word dolphins?
Yeah, I don't know. Is it the word dolphins? Do I pronounce that weird? I don't know. No?
So.
I'm okay? Thank you very much. See that, Casey? I've got it all right. All right, Tags, what's the ceiling for T. Higgins?
Top 12 wide receiver, man.
Yeah, buddy.
It's basically what he was once Joe Burrow took over. It's only an 8-game sample size from when Burrow was the quarterback and T. Higgins was a starter. He was the number 10 or number 12 wide receiver, and it was in his first season. Again, he wasn't even expected to start. He didn't start to begin the year. A.J. Green kind of had to suck for that to happen. John Ross had to kind of fade into oblivion, and T. Higgins stepped up and was just dominant. I mean, it does hinge on the fact that Joe Burrow's got to be healthy, because if Burrow's not healthy, it doesn't matter. But right now, from what I'm hearing on Burrow, because I've been looking at his medical stuff, and his doctor came forward and said he expects him to be ready at the start for week 1. He thinks he's going to be on the field. And he's not really that worried about it. So if he's back on the field, T. Higgins, right now I have T. Higgins as my wide receiver 15. I know I'm high on him compared to some, but I it's like an ascending talent. I'm willing to take a shot on guys like Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, because part of it, the reason is a stat I had in the backup in case we overlapped. 25% of the top 24 wide receivers this year were players who were playing in their first or second season. And it just goes to show the NFL is evolving. Even expectations for tight ends. People are starting to expect more out of these guys. I remember before it was like, you didn't get production out of a tight end until his second contract. That was just what was expected. Nowadays, it's like, oh, if he doesn't produce as a rookie, this guy sucks.
Yeah, I have him 19th. Joe, sounds like you got pretty excited there. Sounds like you're optimistic on Higgins as well.
This is what we pride ourselves in every year, is trying to, especially when we're working on the Black Book, we identify the guys who are going to make a jump. The guys you could draft as a wide receiver 3 who become a 2 who become a 1. 2 years ago it was Godwin and DJ Moore, and they both jumped from 2s to 1s. Last year, it was Calvin Ridley and DK Metcalf. And I don't know how many shows, and Mike and I just went on and on about Calvin Ridley last year in the offseason together.
Yeah.
And that worked out pretty good. What did he have, like 800-yard games or something crazy like that?
He did, yeah.
Right. So this year, there's 2 for me. They're the early leaders. One is CeeDee Lamb, because I remember September. And just like the old song, and I remember seeing him and Dak Prescott and going, oh my God, this is going to be so good. And then Dak got hurt, and then it fizzled out, unfortunately. But it's him and it's T. Higgins, and those are the 2 guys to me that you could draft as a 2 this year easily, that I both think have upside to be 1s. And I don't think where Mike has him is too high at all. He was so consistent too, and I think that's what Mike's looking at also. There was a run there where he had at minimum, like a certain number of targets and a certain number of catches, and he was just on his run for about 5 or 6 weeks. That was glorious, and the floor was so good, because I remember using him so much at DFS and saying, it's the floor and the price, and where you're looking at T. Higgins and people are undervaluing him, and they're still looking at Boyd, or they're still hoping AJ Green happens, but no, it was Higgins who was the guy. Now, hopefully they won't take somebody else above him in the draft this year, but my goodness, I think T. Higgins is right there, and I agree wholeheartedly with what Mike's saying about him.
All right. Good note to end on. Joe, great job. This is, I'm trying to, hold on as long as I can to the host.
Oh, you're not going anywhere. Where are you going? Come on.
Yes, everybody relax. I'm not disappearing. I'm not bequeathing the show to Joe, okay? I'm going to appear and everything like that, but Joe will be taking over as a regular host. But I will make my appearance, of course, including later this week. In the meantime, make sure you check out Tags' article, 175 interesting facts from last season. We only touched on a handful. You could read that thing and learn so much, as you always can, from reading anything involving tags. As I said, we will be back later this week with another episode. Until then, have fun, read Tags' article, and I'll talk to you in a couple days.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FantasyPros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.